Hello everybody, my name's Colin D. Ellis and welcome to the Culture and Coffee podcast, where I discuss a news story or a topic of workplace culture and some practical things that you can do over the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. So let's get into today's episode. Hello everybody, on today's podcast I'm going to talk about 5 things that great cultures do, just 5 things, but for me these are the 5 truly important things. Now, like everything on the podcast, just give you some things to try yourself as well, and I hope you get that sense of, hey, we can do these things too. Now, often when I work with organisations, what I hear is, we want a Red Bull culture. People know I work with Red Bull. We want a Red Bull culture. We want a Netflix culture. We want a Spotify culture. We want a Google culture. And you know, it's kind of good that they've got that vision in mind, that that's where they want to be. But usually there's something missing. What they want to do is copy someone else's culture. And of course you can't copy someone else's culture. And so whenever I start with new organizations, you know, I kind of go through a little bit of a process to find out where they're at. You know, the first thing I do is, you know, what kind of intention is there to actually change what you have right now? Certainly for me, that intention has got to be there from a senior management perspective. Now, you know, often I'll work with just an individual senior manager and their team who say, you know, we've got a team of, let's say, 100 people. We really want to transform the way that we do things. And everyone's got to be behind that. Everyone. So that intention is the first thing that I check. And of course, I can help with that by providing some statistics about why it's important, you know, and some case studies, as I'll do today. But that intention has got to be 100%. That's the first element. The second element is kind of what knowledge do you have about culture? And what knowledge do you have about the change process? One of the requests I've had is to do a podcast on change management, which I'll do in the next couple of weeks. And there isn't much knowledge. Even from people who have people and culture in their title, they still don't really fundamentally understand what culture is, how it's built. And in a previous podcast, I talked about this, you know, and often that's where I add the most value is, I'll talk through some of these things, but I help people not only to understand culture, but also help them to do it. Because then the third thing that I check is, well, you know, what actions have you taken? You know, often people will do an engagement survey and they'll come up with a lot of actions. And, you know, have you actually taken any of those actions? If you haven't, then it's likely that engagement will be affected, because people are like, well, hang on a minute, we told you what wasn't working and you haven't done it. So, you know, that knowledge has got to inspire action and do some things differently. And then the last thing is, you know, what impact have those actions had on the way that you do things? And you either need to double down and do more things, or you get to a point where, okay, we're doing the right things for now. But you really have to understand. So, you know, for me, you know, when you look at great cultures, is there's full intention, there's widespread knowledge, they take action, and the result of that action is positive impact. And what that then does is it generates a growth mindset. People want to do more stuff. So, you know, all of these things really, these are all things that I check, you know, before I actually start. And you know, kind of the reason that people bring me in is because why would they entrust any kind of culture change with organizations that have a bad culture? You know what I mean? So these 5 things, I'm going to give you some case studies of people that do them, so you can ask yourself, okay, well, did we have that knowledge? If we did, great. What action do we need to take? And then, you know, what impact are we looking for? Otherwise, hopefully it's new knowledge to inspire some action. And all of these things are possible in every single culture. All right. And I know that because I've seen them and I've seen them happen. So let's start with the first one, which is the most obvious one. And, you know, the question that I get asked most when I speak at conferences is, you know, kind of why do organizations have poor working cultures? And it's a really obvious answer. And the obvious answer is that people don't know how to build culture. So why would you expect it to be great? Right? It's like, it's like just expecting to be great at something without ever practicing, without, building the knowledge. It's like just assuming you can speak another language without figuring out sentence structure, grammar, and then learning it and practicing it. Well, the same is true as culture. As an organization, if you want a great culture, then you have to teach people what it is. And for me, the root cause of pretty much everybody's culture problems is the simple fact that people just don't know how to do it. Shane Hatton talked about this in his book, and he did a whole load of research and found that only 3% in his research, only 3% of leaders actually knew how to build culture and maintain culture. 3%. And when I read it, I was like, wow, that's way more than I expected. 3%. But of course, you've got to teach people. And the thing is, right, is when you teach people how to do culture, then they can go and create it. And when they create it, you get, there's a better chance of a vibrant culture where you get increases in engagement, productivity, physical and emotional safety, sales, and profitability. And for a private sector company, that's your goal, is profitability. If it's government, then it's productivity. We want to be able to do more things to make our lives easier for the general public. Now, Red Bull is an organisation I've been working with for some years, and I've been working with them specifically on a global culture project over the last probably 2 years now. Just an awesome organisation. So, I talked about intention. The CEO said culture is key. It's our number one priority. Now, most of you listening to this will have heard this. You'll have heard CEOs going, culture's important. You'll see it on websites. But then that's not backed up by the action. It's not backed up by an investment. It's not backed up by an education program. There's never any money. When time is tight, discretionary spend gets pulled. And anything and everything that could add to the culture is taken away. And so, CEO Red Bull, very bullish, culture is key, and they've invested in that. So is it any wonder that they have a good culture? Is it any wonder that they get good results? And culture is often tied to the brand. And what we want is, if we want people to look at the brand positively, regardless of who you are, you could work at Disney, Universal Music, wherever. But if you want people to actually truly value the brand, then there's got to be a good culture behind it, because when people live and breathe the brand, they naturally feed that back into the culture, and they want the organization to succeed. So, what I've been working with on the global learning and development team is a program to educate general managers, senior managers on how to build great culture. And of course, it's tailored to Red Bull. It uses their language. I'm in Santa Monica in the US right now, to run a couple more sessions on that. But because people are invested in the brand, what you've got is this real sense of excitement. Yes, we want to know more. We've heard the CEO talk about how culture is key, and we're keen to learn. We're eager to learn. It's kind of not accidental, as you'll hear with these great cultures. It's not accidental that they've got a great culture. It's not accidental that, people are queuing up to work for them. Yes, they see the brand, but also they hear people talking positively about the culture and the conditions and how they treat their people and the knowledge they give them, such that they're able to contribute. No employee wants to come to work every day and thinks, right, I'm just going to do, kind of the job for myself. That's very much what I would call a stagnant culture. Is when you've got a lot of selfish employees who are like, I'm going to do what I want to do. I don't care about the team and the culture. Whereas when you educate people on how they can contribute, then, that's what happens. Airbnb, I'm going to use Airbnb as well. They've got a great culture. When they hire people, they have a week-long process, like part of their induction, that focuses on culture, values, and strategy. All of the things require, that people need to understand in order that they're able to contribute. A lot of organizations that I read about, and some that I work with, they just need someone with a pulse. They just need someone desperately because they've overcommitted to work. And so someone starts on day one, they don't have all the equipment for them, straight away highlighting the kind of culture that they've got. Their boss isn't there to walk them through, talk them through. And the immediate sense that they get is, why have I joined? kind of something else you can think of there is how do you induct people? When I used to run teams myself, one of the things that I would do is take the time to walk them through, get them to meet different people across my team, give them a sense of what we do, but also talk to them about our expectations of each other, not my expectations of them, our expectations of each other. So one thing to think about here is if you want a good culture, well, you've got to train your managers on how to build culture. So develop a specific, it's not a leadership program, right? What you want to do is develop a specific program that teaches people, especially managers, how to build culture. Don't make the assumption that people know. All right, so that's the first thing. The second thing is that vibrant cultures have strong values. And I love what Brian Chesky said about that. So I'm going to use Airbnb, a good segue there. Airbnb have very strong values. And I loved what Brian Chesky said. Brian Chesky said, integrity, honesty, those aren't values. Those are values that everyone should have. Absolutely right. You don't want to say, you don't want to state as your values things that should exist. By default, I remember working with a bank once. They had honesty as a value. I'm like, gee, if you have to remind people to be honest, maybe they shouldn't be working in a bank. Brian Chesky went on to say, but there have to be 3, 5, 6 things that are unique to you. Now, they used to have 6 values, but one of the great things that Airbnb do, I do this with my programs as well, is they involve the staff in the definition of the values. Because then they become the values of the culture, not the values of the senior leadership team. Too often these things are mandated, and then senior leaders are like, oh, why don't people feel connected to the culture? Because you told them what it was. And so they have that little inner teenager that's pushing back on these things. So they ask for feedback at Airbnb. And they worked specifically with their staff on this, and they cut them down to 4. And I like 4 because 4 is memorable. You can remember 4. They didn't outsource the work to, a consulting company with a terrible culture, of course, because why would you do that? Because all that does is it creates negativity towards the work that you're doing. They're like, oh, this is so typical of us, outsourcing the work to other people rather than us doing it ourselves. So their 4 values are championing the mission, right? So they have a very strong mission, and, kind of a part of championing the mission is about uniting with the community. And I think their mission is, let me see if I can remember, create a world where anyone can belong. Or anyone can belong anywhere. I think that's what it is. Google it. It's got a really strong mission. So that's their first value, champion the mission in whatever way that's right for the individual. All right. Because what you want individuality, but individuality that contributes. The second thing is to be a host. And I really like that, because what that does is it plays into the Airbnb kind of narrative, which is about, caring, compassion, honesty, safety, which I'll talk about shortly. So be a host is, how can you be welcoming to other people? The third one is embrace the adventure. So that's very much about curiosity, growth mindsets, a dedication to growth, individual growth and team growth. That sense that no one's the finished article. And we want people to feel like when they join a good culture, that's part of the thrill of the ride. It's just like, you don't really know what you're getting other than a really great experience, but you don't know how you get that. And then the last one is be a serial entrepreneur. Now, the word serial is spelled Cereal. Now, if you know anything about the Airbnb Genesis story, basically Brian Chesky raised the funds to start the business by selling cereal. I wrote about that in Culture Fix, I think. And I wrote all these things that I'm talking about, all in Culture Fix, the book. So if you're interested in knowing exactly what you can do, and after each chapter, I talk specifically about the things that you can do to actually do these things. Serial entrepreneur, which is really about innovation and ambition and vision and these kind of things. So I think, one thing to think about here is, do your values represent who you are as a business, and who you, are you embracing them, or staff embracing them? If you've got 6 and people don't know what they are, then no. And remember always to get the staff involved, because it's their culture. The third thing is don't tolerate brilliant jerks. That phrase was pioneered by Netflix. Reed Hastings, who is the co-founder of Netflix, said in his book, some companies tolerate them for us, the cost to effective teamwork is too high. Too high. So, they don't do that. They don't do that. And Netflix very much, I think it was in the 2017 Culture Deck, where they talked about the fact that Netflix hire, develop, and cut smartly, so they have stars in every position. And that's what they're looking for. And they have this thing. Now, feedback is critical to everything that Netflix do. And I think whose book was it? It might have been Reed Hastings' book, where he said that it's something like it's tantamount to I think it said it's tantamount to disloyalty if you don't provide feedback that can help an individual to grow, something along those lines. But they have this thing, Netflix, called the Keeper Test. And a Keeper Test is where they ask managers if they'd fight for an employee as an indispensable star. And if managers wouldn't fight for them, then they, kind of look to offer them a package. Having said that, though, the other thing that Netflix are really good at is managing poor performance. Because you might be listening to this going, oh, well, we can't afford to pay people off. I get that. I totally understand that. And as a former manager myself, I think I was only in a position to do it probably once or twice in my entire management career. Definitely not in government. However, what we did have in government when I was in government was really strong probation, and we set expectations not only about work, performance, but also about attitude and contribution to culture. And where we didn't get that, then we didn't hire someone at the end of their probation. I love the phrase, I'd rather have a hole in the team than an asshole in the team. I really like that. But it's true. So don't tolerate brilliant jerks. You really got to make sure that you create the conditions for autonomy so that people understand that they're empowered. Patty McCord, former chief talent officer at Netflix, wrote about this. But then people have got to have the right attitude. They've got to be a good human being to the people around them. They're not going to be selfish and just do their own thing. And they've got to want to contribute to the team. And then they've got to do good work. And if they don't do good work, then there's a pathway. Now, if you're HR, then you've got to make sure that pathway is not 6 months. I worked with HR department once, and they were like, oh, it's a 6-month process, Colin. I was like, so A, why? And B, I still want to follow it anyway. I had a misogynist on the team. So, I think one thing to really think about here is, you've got to get good at feedback. You've got to get good at performance management. You've got to be good at setting expectations for people. Make sure that when they join, they get an understanding. There's that culture induction and their expectations behaviorally. And if they don't behave, don't let them hold you back. Sometimes it only takes one person to hold back an entire culture. I wrote about this recently. And don't allow that to happen. Literally don't allow it to happen. Make sure that you performance manage those people. It's not just about performance, it's about behavior too. Number 4 is create safety. Now, safety, if you're interested in psychological safety, then I highly recommend you follow Amy Edmondson, who has been talking about this for years. I've followed her for years, and it's great to see that it's now part of our language. And she defines psychological safety as kind of shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So these are teams that are free of blame, free of harassment, but also psychological safety is not being overworked. Now, Google surveyed its teams, I think it was between 2012 2015. It's called Project Aristotle. If you're interested, go and have a look. And they found that the number one success factor was psychological safety. And it's something that they focus a lot on. They used to have a chief happiness officer called Chade Meng Tan. He's written a couple of good books. So go and have a look at that. And what they found was the empathy. So actually making time for people to understand each other. So, human connection drives collaboration. When organizations are task focused first, what they do is create the conditions for individual but not team performance. And actually it drives a wedge between people rather than bring people closer together. So safety is where, we get to know each other, we get to understand each other. There are no stupid ideas. We help each other to understand. And what we don't do is agree to disagree. When you agree to disagree, what that does is it undermines psychological safety, because it means that we never ever get to the point where we resolve differences. And psychologically safe teams are, not only where you feel you can bring your best self to work, which is great because that's where you get peak performance, when you feel able to do that. You don't have to put a game face on or bring a different person to work. Have you ever done that? I know I used to do that from time to time. It's like, I have to be this person when I'm dealing with this manager. And that's different from changing your communication style based on who you're dealing with. But so there's got to be this, kind of agreement that we'll work together, this concept of kind of agreeing where you actually create forward momentum. So I think the thing to think about here with safety is, well, actually as teams sit down and agree what's appropriate, what's not. It sounds obvious, I know. When I teach managers how to build cultures, I talk about having, a team agreement. Sounds fairly obvious. And some teams do it, where you agree how you're going to behave towards each other, what's a good human trait, what's appropriate, what's not in your team. And then what's that expectation that you have of each other? And how will you, when you fail, which is inevitable because we're all human beings, then how are we going to help each other to rebound? And that's at the core of resilience, really. But psychological safety is number 4. And then the last one is creativity and innovation, I suppose. Now, creativity is an imaginative process. So this is where you come up with ideas, as opposed to innovation, which is productive. So you can't really measure creativity. You can measure the amount of time you spend being creative. But innovation you can measure. We took that idea, we developed it into this project, we implemented it, it failed, we learned, we factored that learning into future projects. Now the vibrant cultures, they make time to be creative. 3M pioneered this thing called 20% time. And this was post Second World War, when they realized that they had Scotch tape and that was great. But I wrote about this in Culture Fix, but they had Scotch tape, which was great. But actually what they wanted to do was to make sure that they, had other products that they can sell. So they gave their engineers 1 day a week to work on whatever they wanted. And that's where you came up with that's where they came up with the Post-it note, which still makes them a ton of cash. And this 20% time, this 1 day a week, was copied by all the big tech companies, Microsoft and Google and Apple and Facebook and all these people, and even Spotify. Now, Spotify are a great example of an organization that are innovative. Innovative is one of their values, although I don't agree with the wording, but that's fine. And they talk about, we move fast, we take big risks, we're unafraid to fail. And of course, what that requires is safety, which is what I just talked about. So they have plenty of that within their culture. But also, they actually make time to think of new ideas. Most cultures, when I start working with them, I always say, how much time have you got to think? They're like, what, like at the weekend? They're like, well, no, in your job during the week. No, I've got no time. Of course, because they get stuck into these really terrible cultural norms of meetings and emails. For one, they're working on things that just add no value. For two, and they're not been taught how to prioritize their work and to be productive. And for me, creativity is just about bringing people together for a period of time to look at an issue you've got and say, well, how many ideas can we come up with to actually solve this issue? And then picking one of those and saying, right, well, let's do that to try and resolve this. And then at that point, it becomes innovation. Every organization I talk about, they say, oh yeah, senior leaders really want more innovation, but there just isn't time. Ed Catmull talked about this in his book. Ed Catmull is one of the founders of Pixar. And he said, it's a really great book. Obviously, Pixar, highly, highly creative organization. And people are like, oh, well, they would be, he works in creative industries. Yeah, well, you still need to hire the people and then give them the, time to be creative. But Ed Catmull said executives have to resist the natural tendency to avoid or minimize risks. And that then gives rise to creativity. And one of the things that Toyota do really well, Toyota have got a database that captures ideas from people, which they then use in the production of their cars. So one thing to think about there is actually making time for creativity. I stole 20% time from the tech companies when I was a manager, and we had 5% time. I couldn't give my staff a day a week, but we could find 2 hours a week. And that's 5% time, 2 hours a week to look at a problem we've got and actually come up with some solutions to change it. And organizations have copied this. And there are some organizations that I've been working with and I have worked with, they're still doing 5% time. I spoke to someone recently. I did a year-long program with a team in Canberra about 4 years ago. And I spoke to someone recently. She was like, oh my gosh, we still do 5% time. And it's great. And there's proof there that you can do all of these things, right? So train managers on how to build culture, have a set of strong values, don't tolerate brilliant jerks, create psychological safety, and make time for creativity and innovation. You can do all of those things, but linking back to what I said at the start, there's got to be the intention to do so. It can't just be words. You've got to have the knowledge of how to do it. You've got to take action, then you've got to assess the impact and then do it again. Hope you've enjoyed today's podcast. Thanks for listening to today's podcast. If you'd like to find out more about how I can help you transform the culture of your team, head to my website at www.colindellis.com.